everybody. Welcome to the FanHammer Podcast. I am your host, Uncle Sam, and Shadow is not here. His laptop self-deleted. So today we have a special guest host. Please say hello.
I am Shadow.
No, you're not.
I'm Shadow.
No, you're not.
I am depressed, divorced Shadow. Hello.
What the hell? Please welcome Macro. Give a nice round of applause.
Hi. Again, I'm Shadow.
No, you're not.
The divorce was very rough. All jokes aside, hello. Hi, I'm Macro. We're Bobby.
Bobby Tortilla.
I don't know. Yeah, Sir Robert Tortilla.
Or as my fiance calls you, Mr. Tortilla Man.
Hey, that is a banger name.
Yeah. But today, considering how much 40k has changed in the last... How many years has it been since 8th edition? Like, how long has it been since that's come out? It's been 6 years since 8th
I'm pretty sure
came
it's
out.
been 6 years, yeah.
I'm going to double check. Oh, wow, it's been 8 years. It's been almost 10 years
wow.
since... Oh, my.
Wow, I'm getting old. Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
I only got into it, say, late 9th? Say 2022, so a year before 10th came out.
Oh, okay.
So...
I've got into it roughly around like 2019 during the pandemic that I won't name.
yes.
I really dug deep.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of high school. But anyways, back to what we were originally discussing. 40k has changed quite a lot over time, to the point where if you go back to Rogue Trader and look at, say, 10th edition now, it's not entirely unrecognizable, but it feels like an entirely different thing, but, like, familiar. It's like seeing that one kid in middle school and then seeing him when he's 25. And you're like, I could recognize who you are, but you are incredibly different now.
See, for me, it's the exact opposite. In my eyes, you can break 40k up into 5 distinct, like, time periods, quote unquote. You've got the Rogue Trader era where everything was just goofy, everything was over the top. Grimdark wasn't even really a concept at that time. It was just, let's take fantasy and put it in space. And for the first 5 years, that was awesome.
Yeah. Because I think 2nd edition launched in 92, 1993, yeah. So from 87 to 92, we had essentially this weird pseudo-satirical but very edgy space fantasy setting.
It was very, very late 80s, early 90s, edgy for the sake of edgy.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we didn't get characters with, like, the hairband hair going like, oh, you just don't understand.
Honestly, that would have felt entirely in character, but we do see some beginnings of what would become known as Grimdark in there, because Rogue Trader is plenty Grimdark. It's just very Grimdark in the earliest version of it, where it's kind of still finding its footing. Similar to, say, like, a band's first couple albums where they're just kind of trying to figure out what they are. Very few things come out the gate fully realized in terms of a concept. But also, and I want to clarify the whole edgy comment, because it's not how we consider modern edgy. It's more like edgy in the sense where it's just dark topics, but it's not edgy, but it's trying to, like, piss you off or get a reaction. It's more like we're using darker topics. Like, we're not intentionally trying to provoke people. Sort of.
Oh, exactly. We are going to have these absolutely brutal, absolutely just horrifying orcs, but to make them slightly more palatable, they're going to speak Cockney.
Yes, because the worst group of people on the planet, according to Games Workshop in 1987, were football hooligans.
Hey, they weren't wrong.
No. Come on, England! Score some fucking goals!
Come on, England!
So have you read the Rogue Trader rulebook?
I have not. Okay, so I keep 1st edition in this really weird spot in my head where it is just headcanon. And I don't want to mess that up.
I can see that.
Like, this sounds silly, but in my head, I want the earliest edition of Warhammer to just be like this goofy, esoteric, like, imagine you've got like a really old copy of the Bible, and it's so old that only 4 of the pages are still intact, and you've got to like put all of that together. No, I'm just busting your balls. No, I have read it.
Oh my god. I'm gonna edit that.
No, you're good.
The interesting thing that I find about Rogue Trader is how recognizable it is to like modern 40k in certain elements. Whereas with, and I'm talking about like the entire edition, not just the rulebook, although in keeping with talking about the rulebook, the initial blurb of what the galaxy is really hasn't changed much.
No. It's the overall setting has stayed basically the exact same. It's just character motivations and how characters sort of react to the setting has changed.
And some of the motifs, yeah. Because, I mean, when you talk about 40k actually progressing into being the more modern setting, what we consider to be 40k now only really came into existence late 2nd and most of 3rd. I think early 3rd edition, especially with that rulebook, created, especially with the expanded fiction around the time with the novels, in particular the Eisenhorn trilogy really gave, which, the Eisenhorn trilogy, if you haven't read it, you should read it. It is extremely good. This is not hype. It is genuinely one of the best 40k novel series, and if you just want to read a handful of 40k novels and don't want to touch anything else, read the Eisenhorn trilogy.
Any of the Inquisitor series books are phenomenal. Every single Inquisitor book has been great. It's been a banger. It's been exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah, what it does really, really well is it gives you a feel for the universe, as well as gives you a view into the underbelly of the 40k universe and kind of leaves you wanting more. Which is something I didn't expect, since I recently read the Eisenhorn trilogy for the first time, and I was shocked how much it referenced, like, the deeper, darker mysteries of the setting that, again, only got introduced in 3rd edition. Because that 3rd edition rulebook, which, spoiler alert, my favorite edition is 3rd. There is something about it where it is melding the goofiness of the first 2 editions, which we'll talk about 2nd edition in a second, and the later stuff that we kind of know now, in this weird middle ground where it's simultaneously taking itself seriously, yet some of the wackiness that existed still is there, but it's portrayed in a way where you can take it seriously. It's like the people in the universe even know that some of this stuff is absolutely insane, but it's still taking itself seriously, which is why, at least in my own personal opinion, I don't believe that 40k has been a satire at all, really, since Rogue Trader. But that's a discussion for another day.
I actually completely agree with that. I think 40k in the last 5-10 years has stepped away entirely from, like, I don't want to use the word, like, political commentary, but they've definitely stepped away from, like, referencing the real world or, you know, putting sly jabs in here or there.
Yeah.
It was definitely just something to get their name basically out there into the market.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, say, early Tyranids, for example, that was very much so referential of the Alien franchise. But now that...
Not just that, you've also got, I think it's StarCraft with the Zerg. Those two are almost the exact same.
They became more Zerg than the Alien franchise. I would argue that Gene Stealers are still very Alien franchise, while the Tyranids are far more Zerg.
The Tyranids for me have always been interesting because when they were first introduced, we had the Zotes, who were like this weird slave race that they controlled. And in a matter of like 2 years, the Zotes were completely phased out. The first Tyrannic War has basically become like this weird mythological state in the setting. But I want to know what happened with the Zotes and what the, I guess, behind closed door conversation was with GW, where they were discussing how the Tyranids were actually going to function on a larger scale. Because the first Tyrannic War was just, it was a mess.
Yeah, the first Tyrannic War, which I don't remember when the first Tyrannic War is really referenced. Part of me wants to think that it was first referenced in, say, 3rd edition, but it was probably 4th, I think, when that really got established to be a thing, because 4th edition really took a lot of what 3rd did and kind of expanded it in terms of world building. And then 5th is definitely more of like stabilizing that. 6th is kind of a stopgap, and then 7th is kind of really the last hurrah for the 3rd edition 40k style, where essentially from 3rd to like 7th, it's not about the actual larger setting progression, which is actually one of the main changes. From 8th edition to 10th, the story progression of 40k as a setting is moving forward, whereas from 3rd to 7th, it stayed remarkably the same, focusing on small stories set within the universe, all the way up until the 13th Black Crusade, whereas 8th through 10th is like Gilliman's back. If that's a spoiler alert for you all, then where the heck have you been? That's kind of...
Yeah, quite literally. If you don't know that 2 of the Loyalist Primarchs are back, just, I don't know,
it's I don't know what planet you've been on, buddy, but welcome back to Earth. And it's more like, oh, hey, we have the Arcs of Omen, the Dark Imperium trilogy, and the Plague Wars. You know, most of the Demon Primarchs are back. You know, Gilliman's back, the Lion's back. Maybe Rogel Dorn's gonna come back eventually. I don't know.
I think that they pigeonholed themselves.
Yeah.
Like, they put so much preference on, like, the year 40k or, like, 41k or 42k that they're kind of at a point where they have to take a step back and really zoom in on one, like, 100-year-long section of galactic history and just nail that down.
Yeah.
Because you can't just go to, oh, we're going to 50k now. No, you have so many storylines that you now have to clean up. It'd just be a mess. They really have to focus on the end of the 41st millennia going into the 42nd millennia.
Which I think we might actually be in the 42nd millennium as a 10th edition.
I'm 90% certain that we are something like 42,003.
Yeah.
Like, we're in the 42nd millennia, but it's not like the... Gilliman hasn't basically sat down and figured out what daylight savings time is for the entire galaxy. He hasn't figured out a unified timekeeping scale, which I don't know how you're even going to start with that. That sounds like a nightmare.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But let's talk about 2nd edition, because 2nd edition is... How much of 2nd edition do you know?
It definitely tries to take itself way too serious. It feels like Rogue Trader was like, all right, fine, you want fantasy in space, here you go. Then it took off, and they're like, oh, shit, now we've got to actually figure out how to make this setting work.
And in an effort to do that, they kind of made things a bit, not necessarily too grimdark, but it's definitely towing the line where it becomes a bit more parody. I think that out of every single edition, this is the one that is definitely the most satirical, but it's not trying to be. It's trying to take itself seriously. It just comes around and makes itself kind of silly.
I really hope it's 2nd edition that I'm referencing, where it's the Space Marines, and they've got, like, the really well-drawn body style, and then it looks like someone just took, like, a JPEG image of someone's face and slapped it where the helmet was supposed to be. That is by far one of my favorite pieces of Space Marine artwork.
Hey, hold on a second. That's Space Hulk, I think.
I think it's John Blanche artwork, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's... Wait, is that... I think that might be Space Crusade. Yeah, it's Space Crusade. It was 1990, so that was very, very close to... That still released during Rogue Trader, funnily enough, so that was 1990. But towards the end of Rogue Trader, it started to become closer to 2nd, so I guess that fits a bit. But yeah, no, that image is... I don't know who did that.
Cursed.
It's kind of cursed.
It's cursed.
I love it.
I don't want to be the 9,000 or the 99th million person to say it, but that older style of 80s, 90s artwork where there was almost no realism, where the Titans were drawn with like these really, really vibrant colors, and they didn't really make sense, but they looked just so cool, and the rule of cool carried so hard.
Oh, I agree 100%. There is something.
I think they need to go back.
I think there is something very strong to be said. Is that Rule of Cool is definitely a style in it of its own, and 40k, at least now, kind of it doesn't really have as much Rule of Cool. It doesn't. I don't want to say it's more realistic now, but it's kind of like the difference between, say, the outfits in the X-Men films and then the outfits from the comics. It's like,
yeah.
Are they still the X-Men? Yes. But is it as cool? No. No, it isn't.
Real quick before we move on, I think that one of the big things that GW was trying with Rogue Trader is they thought that the audience would really relate to the Rogue Traders. They didn't think that the Emperor, they didn't think that Space Marines were going to be these focal points for the setting. I think GW had this understanding that Rogue Traders were going to be like the focal point of the entire setting, that Space Marines, the Emperor, Chaos, those are all just backdrops for the like goofy hijinks that Rogue Traders are going to be getting up to. Like, it didn't even seem like they had plans for Inquisitors.
No, I just think that they mentioned them as kind of like flavor text, and it's only really in 2nd edition where they drop the name Rogue Trader, and then in the rulebooks you can tell that the Imperium is given more focus. I mean, an interesting thing about 2nd edition in regards to its codexes, because Rogue Trader did not have traditional codexes. It had various books like the Book of the Astronomicon and the Compendium, and especially the Realm of Chaos books, which is Slave to Darkness and Lost in the Damned, which detail the 4 different Chaos Gods, which, if I'm being honest, if you want to understand how the Chaos Gods themselves work, if you read both of those...
You can't do better.
You can't do better than Lost in the Damned. I really like Slaves to Darkness. Just the first book, because I believe that deals with Khorne and Slaanesh. But honestly, those 2 books still get a lot right in terms of the Chaos Gods. The ideals are largely the same. I mean, hell, it even sets up to what we would kind of understand now as the Horus Heresy.
I'm actually really glad you brought this up, because it seems like we had this weird, like, 25, 30-year period where Warhammer was just kind of existing. You had a bunch of authors who were just like, hey, I'm going to write this space opera. Hey, I'm going to write this little space murder mystery. But now we're at a point where, I want to say Graham Hancock, but I know that's not the guy. Who's,
Graham McNeil.
Dan Abnett.
Dan Abnett.
Where Dan Abnett's really hit his stride, where he's like, okay, everything going forward has to reference one of the foundational, like, tenets of the story. Like, the End of the Death ending off with basically the beginning of Horus Rising really, really solidifies to the audience that even though 40k did get lost in the sauce for 10, 20 years, now they're at a point where they are walking it back and they're trying to basically reaffirm the pillars that are holding up 40k as a setting.
Which is primarily the mantra that in the grim darkness of the far future there is only war, which it kind of lost in 8th and 9th. Not to say that it wasn't still grimdark, but it definitely felt kind of like, oh, okay, well, instead of 2 minutes to midnight, we might be like 7. Like, it's slightly better.
Like The Infinite and the Divine, one of my absolute favorite books, it definitely feels like it was written during that Rogue Trader goofy period. It doesn't feel like it's as you said, 2 minutes to midnight.
It's not like, I don't know how else to put it. It's not like how the 6th edition rulebook, which I have, and it's not huge, but it's definitely it's a tome. And 6th edition in particular kind of, which is weird, because 6th edition only lasted for like 18 months, or like maybe 2 years at most. It was very short-lived. And immediately went into 7th because a lot of people had issues with how 6th edition was structured. The lore for the actual rulebook kind of paints this grimdark picture to the point of where it almost feels like it's towing the line of, like, 2nd edition, without the silliness. It's like, oh god, this is bad. Continuing back to the rulebooks thing, the different codexes for 2nd edition, like, we didn't have a Codex Space Marines. We had a Codex Ultramarines, which dealt with the Ultramarines and then the various other standard
Codex
chapters.
Crimson Fists?
Nope, it was Codex Ultramarines.
I could have... Oh, no, that's right. Crimson Fists are blue. Duh.
Yeah, Crimson...
My bad.
Yeah, Crimson Fists are blue. When I first heard...
my bad. The red hands are blue. Why didn't I think of that?
When I first heard the name Crimson Fists, I'm like, oh, so they must be red. No, they're blue with red hands. And I was just like... that was one of the moments where I realized, okay.
Yeah, 40k is either so literal that it is up your nose, or it's just like, how are these even tangentially related?
But when it comes to Space Marines, most of the general chapters, so like, say, Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, Salamanders, just the ones that aren't more specialized of the first founding, including a bunch of successors. In fact, the Black Templars show up in Codex Ultramarines, but they're not, like, fully realized. But then you have Codex Angels of Death, which is one of my favorite codexes ever, which deals with the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels. And then you have Codex Space Wolves, which is its own codex entirely. And that came out in 1994, so pretty early on into the edition. So the way Space Marines were handled back then in terms of rules were not only very different, they were trying to make each of the different founding legions unique. But there's a lot of different lore tidbits that kind of, again, start to codify the Horus Heresy being the way it is, etc., etc. But then we get Codex Sisters of Battle, the First Imperial Guard Codex, Codex Eldar, and Orcs. Really, the way that Orcs have been ever since has kind of just been second edition's the template. Like, they haven't really changed that much since. Because Orcs have been the same, largely.
Yeah, you do not need to change the Orcs at all. They are realistically perfect for a war setting.
Yeah.
I do really feel like they were perfected in second edition, and that you could not do better without taking away from another faction.
Yep.
If you were to make the Orcs less goofy, then you'd have to make someone like the Leagues of Votann way more goofy. And it would just feel hollow because the Orcs are such a staple of the setting.
Yep, I agree. But one interesting thing, other than Codex Assassins, which is like a tiny thing, it's very interesting, but it's basically, it's not the same as the third edition Codex Assassins, but second edition Codex Assassins is definitely something very odd. Codex Chaos. Codex Chaos is, okay, full disclosure, I'm a bit of a Chaos fanboy, and it's not even because I think that Chaos is right, I just think that Chaos is cool. That's it.
Yeah, Chaos 100% is the rule of cool, and they've taken it to its logical
Still
shape.
has rule of cool now. I mean, I have two different I have two different codices for 10th edition. I have Codex Space Marines, because I'm painting Dark Angels that I am slowly getting to. But then I also have Codex Chaos Space Marines, because I really want to build either Iron Warriors or Word Bearers. Probably Word Bearers, since I'm the resident Lorgar fanboy of the audience. But Codex Chaos, in terms of its actual summary of the various Chaos Legions, is, again, basically the same. In particular with how it talks about Abaddon and the Black Legion and everything else. I mean, for God's sakes, Karn has basically been the same since second. This is the first edition we actually saw Karn. And he's that one iconic piece of art where he's, like, standing on top of, like, a mountain of skulls. Not the one that's colored, but the black and white picture where it looks like he's breathing fire. That's second edition.
Mm-hmm. All of the early Chaos Lord artwork is just so good.
It's awesome. I mean, even something as... I don't want to say something as minor as the Night Lords, considering the fact that Shadow will, gut me. But the Night Lords even...
What do you mean? I'm Shadow. I'm
oh,
not
right.
gonna gut
You good. Even Legion like the Night Lords are essentially the same. I mean, second edition really laid down the foundational, like, big ideas for most of the big factions, and really all the later editions did was just kind of refine that into something that was more manageable, which brings us, again, to third edition, which I've already kind of blabbed about.
Before we move on to third, I think it's really, really funny that the Imperial Fists, since second edition, have been fighting an uphill battle trying to be more relevant than their successor chapters, and it's still just not working.
Yeah, because who was on the box of the first edition? Crimson Fists.
Yeah, yep, Crimson Fists.
Who was on the cover of the rulebook for third edition? Black Templars.
Yeah, Black Templars, very, very early on, were the Space Marines.
It was them and the Ultramarines that were kind of fighting for dominance.
Yeah.
Which is funny, because in third edition, the cover for Codex Space Marines is the darn Crimson Fists again.
I mean, early on, it was them and the Black Templars.
Which...
they really ran the show.
They really ran the show, and then the Imperial Fists are just there, which is funny, because in the Horus Heresy, the Imperial Fists are a very prominent legion, but ever since then, they really haven't been.
That's the thing. The Imperial Fists could have single-handedly beaten Horus, like Norn could have walked up, hitting, Horus Lupercal with the Stone Cold Stunner and RKO, whatever. And the Black Templars would still be more popular. Sigismund would still be the Space Marine that you think of.
The Space Marine I think of is Karn, because World Eater's fanboy. Because
That's fair. He also is probably the most recognizable Space Marine.
if you... Karn, at least to someone who doesn't understand Space Marines, I've shown people pictures of Karn, and they're like, what is that? Who is that?
Oh,
compared
that's
to like
clearly an evil
compared
dude.
to other Space Marines, Karn just has aura.
Yeah.
He's like the Space Marine equivalent of Jason Voorhees.
You either look at that and you're like, hell yeah, or you look at that and you're like, oh, ew.
Yeah, if you're OU,
No in between.
probably shouldn't get into 40k.
Yeah.
If you don't think Karn is cool, because that's most of it, you should probably not find something else to do. But when we get to 3rd edition, and we'll talk about 3rd edition briefly since I already blabbed, 3rd edition did a lot more, as well as streamlining the rules. It gave a lot more of a jumping off point for writers to create novels surrounding the actual setting.
Yeah, early on it didn't feel like GW actually planned on releasing anthologies. It didn't seem like they planned on releasing like actual dedicated character books as much as it was like these overall setting driven books.
Yep.
Kind of like Stephen Baxter with the Zeely sequence, where the characters are just this vehicle for the plot, whereas to now the characters are the plot, not just means of getting the plot to point A to point B. They are the plot.
Yeah, exactly. That makes complete sense. But even then, I think now it's more about characters. I think at the time, it was more about certain factions and certain events. Because this is when we start getting a lot of different rule books. For like campaign supplements, like Armageddon, which is about, one of the wars for Armageddon. I think the third war for Armageddon, actually. The third war of Armageddon, yep. Which gives you a bunch of rules for, I'm blanking right now.
Honestly,
orcs.
Armageddon was just the perfect way of flushing out the Imperial Guard, being like, okay, the Imperial Guard has everything from Cadians and Death Corps all the way up to the Armageddon Steel Legion. Here's everyone.
Also, here's the Black Templars and the Orc Speed Cult, and also Salamander's rules. But then we jump over to Codex Eye of Terror, which is about the original 13th Black Crusade. Which is very important. Which came out in 2003 around the same time as the Liber Chaotica books came out, which are a series of very niche art books that kind of talk about chaos in terms of both fantasy and 40k, but one specific book, Liber Chaotica Khorne, which I found when I was doing research for my Khorne video that I desperately want to remake, because I don't think it's very good. Sorry, I don't. To those of you who like it, that's cool. I feel like I could have done better. It gave me a lot of information about Khorne, but it also set up the fact that Abaddon and his 13th Black Crusades was part of a much larger plan, and it wasn't just him failing 13 times. And that was like 2003. There seems to be a much larger concerted effort to build 40k up as this actual setting and story rather than just a war game. And that's the main thing that 3rd edition did. And one of the main reasons why I believe this is the Index Astartes.
I 100% agree. The fact that they actually understood from 3rd edition that rogue traders weren't going to be basically their selling point. Yeah, I 100% agree.
And what Index Astartes did was it set up everything from, say, expanding the Badab War, the Legion of the Damned, to explaining the history of the different Space Marine legions and what they did during the Horus Heresy.
Before you move on, the 2 Space Marine chapters or legions that we lost, the Vindicators and the Rainbow Warriors. Dude, I am so sad that we lost those.
I like the Rainbow Warriors. And the interesting thing about the Index Astartes column is that the last one that was released was in 2005 with White Dwarf 312, and the next one was in August of 2017. And the Horus Heresy series didn't get started until 2006. And a lot of the stuff that we've seen in the Index Astartes stuff is very much so still what happens to the various legions in the Horus Heresy, which means they were at least teetering with the possibility of trying to explain that.
Well, early on, they wanted to have the Horus Heresy just as like this footnote, this historical footnote of like, hey, this happened, it was bad, let's not let that happen again.
Yeah, they put more focus on the Bad Ab War than the Heresy.
Well, yeah, the Bad Ab War was awesome. Luft Huron was... Luft Huron, later Huron Blackheart, is such a compelling antagonist.
Oh, yeah. He's great. He's one of my favorite Chaos Lord peoples. When he showed up in the Night Lords trilogy, I was just like, yep, good old Huron.
He's one of the few Chaos Lords who shows up and you're like, okay, the plot is actually gonna progress.
Yep.
It took Abaddon 14 tries for the plot to progress. It took Huron Blackheart like 2 pages.
Yeah, but to be fair, I'm an Abaddon apologist. But moving on to 4th edition. 4th edition definitely did not change much. It was just kind of more of the same. Chaos Space Marines from 4th was pretty meh, but the 4th edition Orcs was pretty great. But interesting thing, Codex Chaos Demons, 4th edition. That's new.
Is that the one with the Chaos Lord with all the spikes and he's standing on top of the mountain of corpses? Or am I thinking of a different cover?
That is, I believe, a fantasy art.
Ah, okay.
This is just like a horde of very monstrous-looking demons. It came out in 2008, so it was pretty late. But, yeah, Codex Chaos Demons.
Is that the one where they introduced Scarbrand?
I believe so.
Okay.
But moving on from 4th edition, because 4th edition is really just 3rd edition again, we move on to 5th. And 5th edition has... It has a bit of a legacy.
So I believe that 5th through 7th edition...
Spiritual Liege.
Yeah, 5th through 7th was this really, really weird spot in, GW and 40k's history where the Emperor, for some reason, was, the big bad guy of the setting, but they couldn't outright say it. They did everything possible to make the Emperor look like a really, really shit dad, a really, really bad god. This is when... No, Erda was 8th edition, wasn't she?
Yeah, I think... Master of Mankind came out, 2015, so that was 7th. But the most interesting thing about the 5th edition is a lot of the weird lore tidbits, like Blood Angels and Necrons becoming friends, or briefly allying with each other, which, given the modern Necron lore, which was, at that point in 5th edition, changed pretty drastically, where essentially we have Necrons the way they are now, with Trazyn and everyone else running around. That was established during this time, which is the most notable change from this edition. In other news, the Sisters of Battle got the shaft because they only had a digital PDF chapter-approved codex rules for that edition.
That's still better than the Ynnari.
Oh, man, don't. I liked the Ynnari. That makes me upset.
That first book, it wasn't terrible.
It wasn't awful, and the second one, it was no. But we finally got a new Codex Dark Eldar in 5th, which, is good considering the fact that, they didn't have a 4th edition Codex as far as I know. I don't think they did. And I think the last one they had was in 3rd edition.
No, the Eldar really didn't get flushed out until 5th edition.
Yeah, but especially the Dark Eldar, where they just kind of got the shaft. In 3rd edition, the Eldar was actually, pretty well thought out. Same thing with 4th edition as well, but... I'm not even gonna lie. 5th edition is one that I definitely I can see going back and looking at the community at the time, especially considering the fact that 5th edition is when TTS really got its start. The amount of hate Matt Ward got, I understand. He's a decent writer, but he to be fair, though, I don't really put all the blame on him. GW wanted the Ultramarines to be the Golden Boys, and if they wanted that, they signed off on it. So, I don't put all the blame on him, but I still don't like the Spiritual Liege comment. I know I sound like a complete old man saying that, but I don't care.
The Ultramarines fit the motif of 40k better than the not the Imperial Fists, the Crimson Fists or the Black Templars ever could. This
as a general chapter, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no other chapter really represents 40k, or better yet, the Imperium as a whole, of this Greco-Roman bureaucratic nightmare.
Yep. 5th edition did change some rule stuff, but not enough to the point where I feel like it's worth discussing. But Codex Blood Angels and Grey Knights, having that one lore tidbit about the Sisters of Battle and covering themselves in blood.
Look, they were on a time limit, and the sisters were just the fastest way.
It also is the reason why Kaldor Drago was such a meme for so many years. So 5th edition is kind of like GW had to roll scatter dice for an edition, and they got some really good stuff and some really stupid cockamamie garbage. And up next after that is 6th edition, which is, again, pretty much a footnote. It had a ridiculous amount of codices, despite the fact that it was only out from 2012 to 2014. It was really, really short. It's the shortest edition that's ever existed, because for most of the time it was like 5 or 6 years or like 4 years. I mean, 4th edition lasted 4 years. 3rd edition lasted 6. 6th edition lasted 2 years. It was very, very short, and yet they pumped out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 codexes, alongside the Apocalypse, frickin' rule set, and a bunch of other supplemental material. They were going crazy. They threw everything at the wall here, and yet almost none of it stuck. Even though I do like the 6th edition rulebooks, it definitely felt like it was kind of just too much, too fast, all at once.
They didn't have a focus for the edition.
They just made a new edition because the actual hardcover book is almost 500 pages.
Yeah, and honestly, 300 of those pages are nonsense.
Most of it's actually pretty good lore. Like, John Blanche was still doing art at this time for the most part, and it was still really, really great.
I thought John Blanche left in 2006.
He still did commission art.
Oh, okay.
And at this point, 6th edition was kind of trying to right some of the wrongs of 5th edition, which it did, but, I mean, the only really unique thing that I can think of is, like, a lot of the different supplements that came out. I mean, we got an Imperial Fist supplement for the 3rd company of the Imperial Fist, the Sentinels of Terra, as well as one for the Iron Hands, for the Clan Raucan company. But you also have a codex for Legion of the Damned, which is weird. You wouldn't expect that. There were too many codexes for two different factions. Yeah, you had a codex for the elite group of the Guard, the Tempestus Scions. There was too much stuff going on. Imperial Knights showed up, but again, it's just too much all at once. Didn't work. And then we move on to 7th. And 7th still has a lot of codexes. Even though it lasted about 3 years with a unique rulebook format where it was essentially 3 different books in like a cardboard sleeve, which I've seen this at a buddy's house.
I actually really did like those bundles because it felt like for the first time they actually were trying to nail down the setting.
Yeah. But again, it was too many codexes.
Yes, it was definitely spread too thin.
It was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I could wager there's about like 20, 23. The Dark Eldar got a Codex this edition as well as a sub-codex. That is how you know there's too much. And this was around the time that Age of Sigmar was about to get off the ground. There was a change of the Guard where Tom Kirby left. And we move on to 8th edition. And this is where we are now at modern 40k.
I'd argue that 8th edition isn't modern in the fact of it's not the, I guess, modern way that the story is told.
8th that's more 9th, I think.
Yeah, 8th edition is when we get Master of Mankind. It's when we get the Erda situation. 8th edition, they still didn't understand what the Imperium was. It feels like there was a 5-6 year period between, I think it was 4th or 5th edition and 7th edition, where they just did not know what the Imperial government was. They did not understand how the Milky Way was partitioned. It just didn't feel like they were the same company or the same creative directors, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Although Master of Mankind came out in 2016, so that was late 7th. So, but I'd say largely, yeah, they started to continue those sort of progression things. I think talking about the Horus Heresy game and how that changed is an entirely different subject for a different video, which I would like to do at one point because I think that would actually be quite interesting. But 8th edition is notable because Primaris, and Primaris had some growing pains. In particular, you can't use your Land Raiders or Rhino, which is stupid. I get that existed to sell new plastic models because, again, this entire setting is an excuse to sell plastic army men that you can play a game with for about 6 hours.
A lot of people don't realize that it is plastic miniatures first, then books, then everything else.
Yes, because the main thing that determines what's canon in 40k is the codexes. The books are there to flesh things out, and you're lucky if you get anything fleshed out, because keep in mind, Gathering Storm, which happened in late 7th edition, which is also the reason why, Gilliman's back, it was 3 books. It was Fall of Cadia, the book about the Inari, and then Rise of the Primarch, which, Gilliman. We did not see the actual events of the 13th Black Crusade in, detail, aside from, other books, like, say, Cadia Stands or whatever, which talked about an entirely different part of the conflict, until last year with the Fall of Cadia novelization by Robert Rath, which is an excellent book, and it is literally just the Gathering Storm Fall of Cadia book in the form of a novel.
I think Robert Rath should be the only person allowed to touch anything with a Necron character.
I'd agree with that.
He is the only person who actually understands that the Necrons are cool because there is, this weird inkling of humanity, behind 7 walls. A lot of other authors are like, oh, isn't this, robotic aspect cool? No. No, it's not. Was it 7th and 8th edition? Which one was it where they introduced Belisarius Cawl? Wasn't that mid-7th edition?
That was late 7th. That was the Gathering Storm books.
Yeah.
Where he just kind of showed up, and I wasn't a fan at the time, but from what I've seen about the discourse at the time, everyone's like, who the hell is this guy? And then he shows up in a couple of the Horus Heresy books, and everyone's like, oh, okay. Well, now they're kind of going around justifying it, but to be fair, that's kind of how... the way 40k canon works is like Star Wars. Everything's canon until Games Workshop says it isn't.
Actually, I think that is such an accurate way of putting it.
I don't have an issue with that. I think that's fine. 40k has a canon, which is why when the recent comments that Games Workshop and some of the writers made about it, I'm like, yeah, I don't know why everyone's upset about this. This is kind of how it's always been. I've always kind of understood that that's the way it is because that's how it's always functioned. But discussion for another day. I probably made some people mad by saying that, but it's fine.
It really does feel like Cawl kind of just showed up, though. Because, you have Erda, where she shows up, she does, 1 or 2 important things, and then boom, Erebus.
And then dies.
Yeah. And then with Cawl, it's like, okay, I'm going to do 1 or 2 important things, and then I'm still going to be relevant. And I'm going to outshine all of your favorite characters, but, get bent.
Yep, I agree. But with 8th edition... most of 8th edition is just changes to rules and introducing new factions. So we got the Death Guard, we got Thousand Sons. But also, 8th edition still suffers from the problem of having too many codexes. You have Space Marines and then individual supplements for the Ultramarines, White Scars, Iron Hands, Raven Guard, Salamanders, Imperial Fists, and then the Vanguard Space Marines, which are the ones that are in the Phobos armor. You have codexes for the Dark Angels, the Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and then a second Space Marines codex, Y, and then Grey Knights, Guard, Mechanicus, Custodes.
It really makes you wonder why Space Marines are so popular when GW just throws hundreds of codices for just hey, these are the exact same, but their names are Chinese inspired and they're fast.
Well, actually, they're more Mongolian, but yeah, because it's Genghis Khan in space.
Yeah.
But also, Custodians got introduced in 7th edition, but really not much was done with them until 8th. And then you have the various Chaos ones, Craftworld Eldar, blah, blah, Necrons. It's too much. And it's not necessarily the amount, because I've gone back and read all of these codexes, and I know that sounds insane, but again, when I get into something, I go in, hog wild head first. The rules have changed quite a bit, but again, that doesn't really mean much when you have, 7 different Codex Chaos Space Marines, not Chaos Space Marines, Codex Space Marine supplements. It's too much all at once. And 9th edition, moving on from there, because 8th edition's really the start of the Plague Wars and everything else and that sort of thing.
Which real fast, Plague Wars? Dude, such good books. Those are...
Oh yeah, no, the Dark Imperium trilogy is awesome.
Plague Wars, by far, my favorite trilogy in recent 40k.
Oh, 100%. More of that, please. Yes. Genuine, character-driven, that sort of thing.
Yes, I need to see more of Mortarion looking God in the eye and saying no. I need that.
Yeah. I love modern Mortarion, but Horus Heresy Mortarion, I'm just I'm bored. We don't really have much to say about 10th because we're still in the middle of 10th edition. Because 10th edition is just kind of more of 9th with some major rule changes. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the rule changes since there is a little bit less fluff, but it did streamline the experience more than 9th did, because 9th was kind of a bit of a bloated game. I've played one game of 9th, and it was definitely, a bit. It was definitely an acquired taste. I'll just say this: if I got into 40k through tabletop, I'm not sure I would have stuck around much because the flow of ninth I just did not necessarily like. But ninth edition is where it's essentially modern 40k. Ninth and 10th is kind of after the whole shakeup with GW Corporate. It's kind of settled into a groove. The larger sort of plot is progressing in one way. We have the Arcs of Omen books, which happened later on in ninth, but again, it's the way that the codexes give major lore changes and plot progression, but the main edition rulebook sets the status quo for what's going on, and the various codexes kind of explore the different things that the main rulebook mentions. So the conflict with the Pariah Nexus, and the Plague Wars, again, and everything else, that is all kind of here, and thankfully, the codexes in terms of supplements are far more streamlined. We only have 5 codex supplements for Space Marines now, and they're actual ones that would be reasonable, like Space Wolves and Deathwatch, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Black Templars. We have a pretty good Mechanicus codex. Please don't play Mechanicus for your first army. It's a horrible way to start. The Sororitas got a bunch of new stuff, 9th edition. Grey Knights were also pretty good. Custodes actually had a pretty good 9th edition codex.
Well, the Custodes at 9th edition were the single most bang for your buck army.
They still are, considering the fact that the 10th edition codex, aside from the issue that will not be mentioned, just isn't very good.
I mean, Custodes are the perfect beginner army because for less than $300 you have a full army, and you're almost not going to get that with any other faction. Like, I recently started Imperial Guard. I'm $120 in, and I think I have 110 points. I actually have less points than I have spent money.
So, that's really cool. That's awesome.
I mean, it's cool, but if you're my wallet, it's definitely not.
Oh, yeah, no, there's a reason why. I mean, I'm probably going to get one of the boxes of the Emperor's Children Marines, like the standard line trooper that isn't like Noise Marines, which I told myself I would not buy any more models until I finish my Dark Angels or Emperor's Children come out. And they're coming out soon, so I guess I'm coughing up money to buy a box of plastic models.
Yeah, but that new Emperor's Children range is phenomenal. Absolutely
it's phenomenal. It looks great. And also in 9th edition, we got dedicated Codex World Eaters. And out of all of the, outside of Emperor's Children, World Eaters is probably the best dedicated Chaos Army Codex. It's really great, and it also has a really good model range. Unfortunately, the Thousand Sons have been kind of left and got the shaft. But again, I'm going to be honest, there's a really strong argument that the Thousand Sons have gotten more of the shaft than the Iron Hands have, and to be honest, kind of agree.
Well, yeah, the entire thing with the Thousand Sons is they ruin the setting, and because of that, they have to get trampled on at every single opportunity.
Which sucks because I have a box of Rubric Marines, and I really love them, but I hate painting trim.
Dude, they've got such cool helmets, but just they're useless.
I don't know. In Space Marine 2, they were really great, though. Briefly going to 10th edition before we quickly wrap up. Right now, we have most of the major factions for 40k being shown as codexes. We still have more that we need, but in terms of the main ones, so like Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, Tyranids, Necrons, Tau, Orcs, etc., we do Codex Eldar. We have all of it there. We have a good amount of supplements, but it's streamlining and it's kind of progressing, towards not having as much codexes because there's too many in the previous editions. Genuinely, 7th edition, 6th edition are ridiculous. I'm baffled as to who thought that was a good idea, as well as having Crusade books and everything else. In terms of a game, 10th edition is showing up to be a really good step in the right direction. Just add more of the fluff back. Just add more of the cool, goofy stuff back, please, and then we're good.
I don't know if they can add more of that cool, goofy stuff, because with the way that Gilliman is, he's not hard restructuring the chapters into, proto-legions again, but with how he's bringing all of these disparate chapters back together, it feels like we're going to get less diversity amongst Space Marines, and we're going to get more, like, key characters. Like, I don't think there's going to be as much of a difference between, like, say, I don't know, the Raven Guard and the Alpha Legion. But we are going to have the difference between, like, their different, like, special units, if that makes sense. Like, the overall legions are going, or chapters are going to disappear, and it's just going to be, like, their caricatures.
No, I understand. But anyways, I gotta wrap up here. I don't mean to cut you off.
You're good.
Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you very much to Macro for coming on and being a guest host. And please send your thoughts and prayers or machine spirits towards Shadow's laptop.
What do you mean? I'm right here.
All right, yeah, damn.
All right, real quick, shout out to Ryan's Toy Reviews.
Why? No.
I don't know.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a good day.